Okay, we've got a really good number of people joining us this afternoon. So welcome everyone to this week's webinar on mental health in the hospitality and events sector. My name is Vicky Cotman and I am the workplace lead at Mental Health First Aid England, and I am delighted to be joined by Natalie Richards and Gavin Percy today, who will be introducing themselves shortly, but they are here to share their insights on the common stress and strains of the sector, the impact of the pandemic on well-being, and managing anxieties about returning to work during this time. Before we start, just a reminder that the Q&A function is open. So if you do have a question, please don't hesitate to just pop it in the Q&A box. My colleague Alex is supporting in answering some of your questions directly today, but we will also hopefully have some time later on in the session to present your questions to the panel later on. So in today's session, we are going to be looking at the common stress and strains of the sector and how the pandemic has affected those. Best practice to support mental health and well-being of employees, including those on furlough leave, and managing the online fatigue as much of the sector moves and has adapted to an online basis. So I'm going to go over to the panel to give them the opportunity to introduce themselves. So Natalie, if I can start with you.
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Nat Richards and I'm a Senior Project Manager here at Cheerful 21st. We're a brand experience agency. We've been around since 1985 and our unique understanding of audience behaviours truly helps us transform those ideas into impactful experiences. I've worked in the events industry for a very long time now, both on the agency and the client side as well. And I've produced some amazing events for various sectors, including media, publishing and professional services here in the UK and internationally. I actually think mental health and wellbeing in the events and hospitality sector has definitely been something that we as a community need to work on. And this is a great opportunity for us to continue that conversation.
Excellent, thanks Nat. And Gavin, over to you.
Yes, hi. So my name is Gavin Percy. I have my own consultancy business, which is split in two. I have a business-to-business consultancy for hospitality industry on sales, and I also have the other side of it is mental health first aid training. My background is all hospitality. I started off as a general manager of hotels and worked my way through into sales, became a sales director for hotels, and then got made redundant from a role in 2013, which is when I started my own business. So I've got that unique perspective in that I understand the industry, but I also have an understanding of mental health and well-being and try and bring that to bear in what I do nowadays. So that's basically my role.
Fantastic, thank you. And we'd like to just take some time to understand a bit more about who we have in the audience today and your connection to the events and hospitality sector. So we'd just like to present the question, and if you just take 30 seconds to have a look at the options and answer what best describes your position. So there should be a poll available, and like I said, I'll give you 30 seconds to answer those. Brilliant. And Alex, if we can see the results of that first question. Brilliant. So we've got a range of roles across the sector, which is fantastic. 45% being from HR, which is brilliant. Few senior leaders, split between restaurants, pubs and hotels, which is great. Event agency, which is fantastic. And a few business owners as well. So wonderful to see such a range of roles across the sector today. And as most of you know, the wider hospitality sector generates £72 billion directly to the UK economy. And there are roughly just over 6 million people work as part of the workforce. So for us, it's really crucial that employers are actively working to manage and look after the mental health of their staff. But the research from the Royal Society of Public Health has found that the mental health and well-being is under significant strain amongst those that work in the sector, with survey results showing that 84% reported increased stress as a direct result of their job, and 1 in 5 hospitality workers suffering from work-related severe mental health issues. And with the last 6 months, pretty much to the day, that the majority of the events and hospitality industry has had to change the way that it works with the public and working in general due to the current pandemic, leading to all businesses kind of changing the way that their staff are working, their working practices, and what their office space looks like. It's likely that mental health of employees within this sector has been impacted in some way. So I'd like to open up our first discussion poll to the audience and ask the question of, how do you feel the pandemic has affected the mental health of employees and staff working within this sector? So once again, I'm going to give 30 seconds just for you to take some time to reread the question and have a look at the answers, and then we'll have a bit of a reflection on those results. Brilliant. And if we could take a look at those results. So we have, what stands out is 65% somewhat negatively, 24% very negatively, 6% neutral, and we do have a small amount saying that there has been a positive impact across the sector in terms of how the pandemic has affected it. And in comparison to previous polls that we've done, actually it is significantly higher in the somewhat negatively and very negatively kind of result category of this poll. But Natalie, I'd like to come to you first, and I guess, are you surprised by the results, the fact that people are feeling that it's had a somewhat negative or very negative impact on their mental health? And what concerns have your people had in your organisation during this period of time?
Well, to be honest, I think that was to be expected. It's nothing surprising there in terms of those results. You know, for the past couple of months since March, we've all been through very unprecedented times and lots of changes, and it's quite a lot for everyone to take on board. And I think in particular in the event sector, we've seen such a massive impact in terms of the furlough scheme and also redundancies quite recently. You go on LinkedIn quite often and you can see a whole host of people within the industry who are suffering quite dramatically, so that's not really surprising. I think in terms of how the pandemic has affected everybody, I think everyone has their own individual experiences and they do tend to vary. Just for myself as a parent, I had to become a parent as well as trying to hold down a job, be a cook, a chef, a cleaner, you know, the list just goes on. So you have to think, you know, before the pandemic, we were obviously juggling a lot of things, but now the pandemic is putting a lot more strain. So you don't have your community around you anymore. You don't have your parents, you don't have your friends that you can go and see. You know, it's literally your four walls, depending on which environment you live in. So it's not really shocking to see those type of results.
Brilliant, thanks Nat. And Gavin, what are your kind of thoughts on these results, and why do you think kind of we're seeing these results at the moment? And is there anything in particular organisations or workplaces can be doing to be supporting specifically during this time?
Yeah, I don't think it's surprising. I agree with Nat. It's unfortunately it just demonstrates what we kind of all suspect is the situation. In terms of why, I think there's lots of reasons, and it will vary from person to person as to how they've been affected. But working from home suddenly, when you weren't working from home before, that puts extra pressures on, and some people have not dealt with that very well. I think MHFA England have got some great resource in there that can support people, which I'd point them to. We're going to give them that link later, which is great. There's also the situation around one of the main issues is around this lack of certainty. No one knows when this is going to be over. No one knows what's going to happen. Nobody knows how it's going to affect their company, whether they're going to be affected by that in terms of their employment. All these kind of things are in the melting pot. I think it's very, very difficult for people to deal with. If they knew what was happening, negatively or positively, they could deal with it. But actually, the uncertainty is preying on everyone's minds. The uncertainty of the economy, the uncertainty of their roles, the uncertainty of their companies. So all of those things are an issue. In terms of the additional question you asked about what can companies do, I do think very strongly it's about communication, making sure that the companies involve their staff in what they're doing, how they're doing, what they're going to do about things, what their plans are, how safe the offices are, how safe they've made their travel policies, if they've got a travel policy, what they've done to adapt that. Those kind of things, because again, it gets rid of the uncertainty. It gets people to feel more confident and more confident about traveling, more confident about going into the office. And the better we can get back to some sort of normality, whatever normality is going to be, then that's so much the better. But the communication of what they're doing about that is the most important thing as far as I'm concerned. And I think some companies are doing that very well. Some companies are doing that very poorly.
Great, thank you. And in terms of, I guess, the anxiety that can build around the uncertainty, is there anything that you would share in terms of how individuals can possibly help manage their anxieties around that uncertainty at all?
I can jump in there because I think before COVID, I was definitely more of a calm, collected individual, very much in control of a lot of things that I was juggling. And I found myself in a predicament where, as Gavin said, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of things that you just don't know the answers to. You switch the news on and it's just dire. And for me personally, I think communication is really key. Being able to communicate and connect with your family members, being able to express yourself, actually just talk through your problems, because I think sometimes when you share your anxieties with others, it just relieves that stress for you a little bit more. In terms of things that I've personally done, I've done a lot of self-help. I've done breathing exercises, which I can't say enough. It's absolutely amazing. It really helps to just center yourself. I've done a lot of meditation. I've actually done a lot of painting as well, which I haven't painted anything since I was probably, 15 years old. And I won't say it's a masterpiece of school, but I think sometimes you just need to take yourself for that space a little bit more and have some kind of self-reflection and having a way to express yourself. I've also used things like poetry as well, because I found there was a point in time where I just didn't know how to put my words down or express myself. And, I know I've read in certain places where writing things like a journal or doing poetry or doing a diary or something like that really helps. I'm not a professional, but these are the things that have helped me get through it as well. Breathing for me is definitely something that I've also taught to my son, because he was very anxious. He was at home, he wasn't around his friends, and just the way he felt, I felt too, but I felt like I wasn't able to feel that. And when I actually sat down and spoke to my close friends, and actually some of my colleagues, they were just like, Nat, just stop. Like, just stay still if you can, because you are still a human being. And I think that's one thing that we definitely need to remember. We're still human and we still have all these emotions, and we need a form and a way to express them. We just can't hold them in. And it's really helpful to be able to talk to people, even if you're able to get some form of therapy or some guidance or something like that. I definitely think that's really helpful as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. In terms of self-care, it's making people aware of what's available on self-care. And the breathing exercise sounds such a simple thing because we all breathe, but breathing in a deep, meaningful way, and the box breathing exercise, if you look that up on YouTube, there's many articles in there about the box breathing exercise, which I think is the simplest and easiest one to do. It lowers the heart rate, lowers the blood pressure, increases the oxygen in the body, and it just relaxes you. I'm not saying it's a solution to all the ills, but it's part of that menu, and finding your coping strategies, whatever is copes for you. If poetry and art is something that you like to do and it relaxes you, then do more of it. But different people have different things. You know, for me, that wouldn't be right for me, but for me, it's walking the dog. It's having time with the family. There's various things that I do that work for me, and everyone has their own thing. So don't think because poetry doesn't work for you, you're a failure. That just isn't for you. Find what does work for you, and try different things until you get to the solution. And talk to other people as well about what works for Lily, and she finds that very good for her. It wouldn't work for me. It's just I can't see it working for me, but for her that's fantastic. She gets down all the stuff she's done that day, all the successes she's had, what she plans to do tomorrow, how she's going to achieve that, and it just cleanses her, and she feels so much better as a result of that. And she feels more organised for the very.
Kind of touched on this in terms of actually being okay with the fact that it's okay to have these feelings of possibly feeling more anxious at the moment and managing that anxiety, but acknowledging that it's absolutely okay not to be feeling 100% with this uncertainty at this time, I think is really key. And I mean, good coping strategies and self-care absolutely promote that all the way, which is great. Thank you both for that. Really fantastic discussion topic. I'm going to take us to our second poll now. So with some businesses reopening in the hospitality and events industry, and many members of staff kind of adapting to working differently in public facing roles, the next question I'm going to put to the audience is, how well has your workplace supported your mental health with return to work, especially in a public facing environment? But this also might apply if you've returned to work if you've recently been on furlough leave. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds to just fill in the results for this, and then we'll take a look in terms of what you've said. Brilliant. If we can take a look at those results. So 26% feeling very well, which is fantastic. 46%, which is the highest of that poll, somewhat well. 9% somewhat poorly, and 4% very poorly. Great to see 7% self-employed, so obviously looking at those individual techniques kind of to support mental health at this time, and 9% saying not at all, no support in terms of supporting mental health with the return to work. Gavin, I'd like to come back to you to kind of talk about why is it so important that mental health of staff is supported, I think especially as individuals return to work at this time and what may be returning to quite new environments.
Well, first of all, I'm actually quite pleased with the results because it's actually better than I probably expected, to be honest. Maybe it's my jaundiced view of the hospitality industry as being traditionally quite poor at dealing with staff issues, but that's promising. But obviously there is still a number of companies that are not dealing with it particularly well. In terms of what do I think is important here and how should companies help. For me, it's making sure that the mental health and well-being strategy for the organization isn't just a tick box exercise. HR departments and occupational health departments may be given the task of writing a mental health and well-being strategy for the organization. They do that, they stick it in a folder somewhere and it gathers dust. And I'm generalizing here, but in my experience, that is often what happens in organizations. What it needs to be done is it needs to be created as a cultural living thing within the organization and be part of how that organization thinks and behaves. Now, one thing that this lockdown has actually done that's a positive is brought mental health to the fore, because previously mental health was very much the poor cousin and poor relation. I do think mental health has come higher up the agenda because of what's happened, and it's been recognised that there's an issue. And I'm very hopeful that when things have some sort of normality back, that will continue. And as a result of that, more and more companies will actually see it as a cultural thing within their organisation. Until companies do that, there is still going to be that issue around mental health. It becomes a tick box exercise. Communication doesn't happen. People don't know what's available to them. The EAP availability isn't made public. People don't know that they can get access to counselling. They don't know they can get access to other supports. And also they don't feel they can actually talk about mental health because they're worried about their roles or their job or their future prospects. So all of those things, if we can open up the lines of communication about mental health and well-being within organisations, it's got to be a step forward. So fantastic that companies are 74% or 72%, I think it is, are well and very well looking after. That's fantastic. We need to keep that momentum going. We need to make sure that keeps happening. But it's very positive, so that's great.
Great, thanks, Gavin. And Natalie, what are your reflections on the results? And I guess from your experience in the events industry, do you have a feeling in terms of if workplaces are doing anything particularly well, and what do you feel needs to be prioritised in terms of supporting mental health with, I guess, events returning from a customer-facing point of view, but also supporting staff at this time?
Well, I think if we're really honest, there's a lot has happened in the past couple of months. Since March, we've gone through so much change, and I think Gavin's right. Before COVID, mental health and well-being was a part of a conversation, but I think now it's definitely been taken more seriously by organisations, and I think it needs to, because a lot of us haven't gone through this experience before, and we may not know where to go, who to ask, or what to do. And we just need that support from our colleagues and from our management team in terms of how we do certain things and having that support as well. I think one of the key things I was thinking about actually is when you think about individual well-being and mental health, sometimes it's good that everyone has a policy, but sometimes I think it's quite helpful to actually ask individuals and really get everybody engaged with that piece. I know here at Cheerful 21st, we're actually taking that very, very seriously, and we're doing a very internal drive where we're allowed to talk and express ourselves, and we have working groups, and some of my colleagues have actually put themselves forward to become mental health champions at work as well. And we're a small company, we're not a big organization, and I think it's something that no matter what size you are, everyone needs to be part of that process, so it feels like it's part of the company. It's not something that, as Gavin said, it's not a tick box exercise. It's part of the company culture. It's the way that we move forward. It's making us feel comfortable, feeling happy when we're coming to work, feeling excited to be in an environment with our colleagues again. So I think it's something that has to be part of that culture and has to be driven by all of us, not just a small proportion of the team or HR or however they're driving this particular aspect of mental health and well-being. I think it needs to be collective, and I think everyone needs to be brought into the conversation as well, and then that just helps the whole entire environment and the whole ethos of how we want to move forward and how we're going to cope, because COVID's not going to disappear tomorrow or next week or next month. We have no idea how long it's going to be here for. So I think we really need to cement it as part of our culture going forward.
Yeah, just to support that, there was a report done by Deloitte end of last year, obviously pre-COVID, but still relevant, I think, that showed that for every £1 that a company spent on proactive measures around mental health and well-being, got a £5 return through increased productivity, less absenteeism, less staff turnover, more activeness, more efficiency, happier staff. So absolutely, it's an investment. It's not a cost. That's how companies need to see it. And if they invest in their people, they'll get the return in spades. And there's actually a case study about Parcelforce who put in a whole mental health and wellbeing strategy in place and improved profitability by £1.5 million as a result of that. They could track the increased productivity, the lack of absenteeism, etc., all those things that I just mentioned, and that was the cost they attributed to their bottom line. So those things that are real and they're validated and they are clear of the benefits for companies. It's then making sure that all companies see that benefit and then utilize it and make use of it.
Absolutely. It makes very good business sense from a financial perspective, but also just in terms of productivity and a happier workforce in terms of supporting mental health. It is crucial, I think, for any business being successful. But I think especially in the events and hospitality industry, we've seen a high percentage of the workforce either be furloughed or are remaining on furlough leave, of which is going to have naturally had an impact on, I think, individuals' mental health. So, Gavin, if I can come back to you in terms of, I guess, how we can encourage having open and honest conversations about mental health and possibly fears about returning to work after a long period of time. And if there's anything you can share, I guess, around the principles of starting a supportive conversation about mental health that you feel would be useful.
Yeah. Well, in terms of the furlough and returning to work, I think there's a couple of things that are important there. I believe that all the staff returning to work should almost be given another induction so that they're brought back into the business as if they're new employees, because it's been a long time we've been out of this, and people's attitudes will have changed. What they remember about the company will be different, but also things will have changed, and the way forward will have changed. So just resetting people who return to work and doing those inductions, I think, is really important. The second thing about return to work after furlough, I think, is to realise that actually there's two sides to the story. There's people who weren't furloughed and people who were furloughed, and there's a very different situation there. But actually, they're both jealous of each other, or both envious. Not jealous is too strong a word, but both envious of each other. Those that were furloughed are envious of those that weren't, and vice versa. And I think the recognition isn't there in some companies that that's the case, and I think it's a very important one to get right, because when people do return to work, you might end up with a division between those that were furloughed and those that were not, and some sort of clash, however that manifests itself. So I think that's something that needs to be borne in mind as well. In terms of how to deal with this on an ongoing basis, again, it's about this cultural thing, and making sure that meetings have mental health and well-being on the agenda, that one-to-ones and staff chats, job chats, also have mental health and well-being on the agenda, that they're asked that question, how are you feeling, but mean it, not just a general, you're right, yeah, you know, it's not like that. It's got to be, how are you feeling? No, genuinely, how are you feeling? And make sure you get to the bottom of that. And people may not want to talk about it. You're not forcing the issue, but making it available to them to talk if they want to, and making sure that the forum is there for them to say how they're feeling, and that they don't feel they can't say. And that's part of this cultural thing we've been talking about, as far as I'm concerned. So those are the sort of main key points that I would take forward. Apart from obviously having mental health first aiders in the business and mental health champions in the business, obviously.
Brilliant, thanks, Gavin. And Nat, you referenced the fact that you have kind of mental health champions within your organisation. Have you found that has kind of helped move forward having open conversations around mental health in terms of improving that side of the culture where you work?
It definitely will. They're still kind of going through the process, so we haven't implemented it quite yet. But I will say that my colleagues we have open conversations about how we're feeling. And I think that's just because we are a very close-knit team. We are a small business again, and we're very close-knit. And I've had conversations with my colleagues. They've had conversations with me. One thing I will say is when you are on furlough, it's really quite nice. I've had so many conversations with my colleagues where they've just checked in on me and just said, hey, Nat, how you doing? How are you actually doing? Not the, hey, how was your weekend kind of conversation. As Gavin said, it's an actual concern about my own well-being while I'm at home, and that has, and I think that's just the culture of who we are here at Cheerful 21st as well. So I think those points are really, really important. Once we get to that point, I know it's definitely going to help us as an organisation really grow and build on that culture as well. But I think culturally we've kind of got the snippets there where we do know how to lean on each other when we need someone to lean on, and it's just really developing on that a little bit more. And I think, you know, one thing about those that are still on furlough, I think it's very important for us to always just check in, because I think there's nothing worse than feeling left out of something that you've known pretty much for the whole of your career at a particular company. You know, I think we've forgotten that before COVID, we spent so much time at work, and essentially our home community, our family and our community at home and our community at work has essentially merged together. So it's all become one. And we just need to be able to make sure that we cement that a little bit more and have things where, and have open forums. I know the girls that I work with are very, very supportive. And I think we just need to make sure that whatever organisation you're in, that you just remember that the person that sat on furlough and has been at home, they've known their workplace for the whole entire time and they've been taken away from that. So they need to be connected. And I think it's very important, as Gavin said, that you need to, you know, join things like company calls so you don't necessarily feel left out in terms of the changes that are happening, or, you know, processes or procedures and all those type of things. And having weekly catch-ups with your managers as well. So at least then you've got a toe dipped in while you're still at home and you still feel part of that organisation as well.
Absolutely, and I think to a lot of that is around having confidence in having an open conversation around mental health. And one of the things that, as Gavin said, in terms of, I think, integrating that in one-to-ones, absolutely something that we do at MHFA England. It is the first question of any one-to-one meeting that we have is sitting down and putting performance and everything aside. It's about connecting with the person and individual in front of you to really ask and listen in terms of how you are. And the other thing we identified, I think, with organisations is supporting and having a really clear return to work policy and process. And one of the things we developed was a return to work and mental health course to kind of fit and build the confidence around how you do that correctly. But also, I think, as Gavin said, the induction and onboarding back into an organisation is really crucial during this time, especially if people have had up to 6 months out of work. So brilliant, thank you, really, really, really valuable insight there. So I think with the next point, we're going to go into our final poll, and just a reminder that obviously we we'll be putting some questions to the panel from the audience. So if you do have a question, please do use the Q&A box, because we'd love to hear from you and we'd love you to present some questions to our speakers today. But as we know, I think the events and hospitality industry is renowned for long hours, strict deadlines, high pressured environments. And I think EventWell reported that over 20% of people in the industry worked over 60 hours a week, and that was pre-pandemic. And obviously over the last 6 months, and I think Nat, you referenced this, routines have shifted. Most have been working very differently, balancing childcare, sharing working environments with housemates, spouses, family members instead of colleagues. So everybody's working world is looking quite differently. So the question that we'd like to ask the audience is, to what extent has your organisation's working practices changed over the last 6 months in relation to mental health and well-being? So I'm just going to give another 30 seconds for you to just fill in the results of that poll, and then we will take a look. That's great. And Alex, if we can take a look at the results of that poll. So we've got 2% entirely changed, 20% significantly changed, Some notable changes at 47%, a few small tweaks at 29%, and 2% not at all. So a range of results, but mainly sitting in smooth, a few small changes and some notable changes sitting in the bulk of that. So in terms of reflecting on the results, Natalie, if I can come to you, are you surprised in terms of, I guess, working practices changing over this time, and what have you found in your workplace specifically that has changed over the last 6 months?
No, I'm not really surprised, because I think essentially we're working in completely different environments now, particularly during the time when a lot of us were at home. I know some of us are still going back to work. So at the moment at Cheerful, we actually have a schedule because we're only allowed a limited number of people in the office. So one thing that we do is once a week, we have an opportunity to go into the office and actually sit down with our project teams and have that interaction and have an opportunity for us to actually brainstorm and see each other face to face, which is also helpful in terms of your well-being, being able to connect with your colleagues, not just on this rectangle screen that we have been used to for months and months and months, but actually just being able to see someone's face and, you know, judge everyone's expressions and how we express ourselves. I think that fundamentally has been actually quite lovely for a lot of our colleagues here at Cheerful 21st as well. Lots of practices have changed, I think, in terms of the way that we communicate as well, our time management, and just making sure that, I think in the working environment it's completely different, but now we have some teams that are still working from home, or they might be in the office. It's just really managing time in terms of when you actually need things done, and making sure that you include an ETA so you can kind of manage that, because some people might still be juggling, I don't know, childcare or some other form of support that they have to manage at home. And then just making sure that we are encouraged to take a full hour for lunch as and where we can. And we're encouraged to actually go outside and have a walk and get away from your desk, because I think we've gotten so used to sitting down and looking at a screen for so long. And I think we also have to remember, you know, we're looking at screens all day long. I think if we all sat down and did an audit about, you know, how much time do you spend doing your phone to your laptop to your TV screen, it's a lot of time. So we're encouraged to actually go outside and have a breather and walk around and utilize your lunch break as much as you possibly can. And then you're fully recharged and you can come back to work and, you know, get on with your tasks. So there's been a lot of change in terms of times. I mean, personally for me, I have to pick my son up from school. So I tend to try and cap off time for me to be able to do that, so I'm not having to pay for extra childcare while I'm at home as well. So, you know, there's those kind of opportunities. So yeah, there's a lot that's encouraged, and it's, to be honest, it's more so on an individual basis, depending on everyone's individual circumstances. And I think that's quite key when it comes to your own personal well-being when you're working at work. And I think that's something that's really cherished at our organisation, and something I think we'll continue to go forward with, in terms of making sure that we're tapping in with the individual and like, how can I support you and how can I make sure that you're well while working, and also making sure that you've got the space to do what you need to do on a daily basis.
Absolutely. And Gavin, I guess over to you in terms of, are you surprised by the results at all, and what do you think has changed with the current environment that we're working in?
I'm a little bit disappointed, to be honest with you. At least there are some changes. I guess that's looking at the positive side. I thought it would be slightly higher on the significantly changed, to be honest, but at least there are changes being made, which is good. I think one of the main things that has changed for people, as Natalie was really talking about, was people working from home when they're not being used to working from home. And we will encourage people to look at the resource that MHFA England have, but it's around routine and taking breaks and making sure you do those sort of things. When you're in the office, whilst you may not even take a lunch break in the office, you're always up making coffee, talking to people at the water cooler, going to their desks, having a chat. When you're at home on your own, isolated, you're just the tendency is to just look in front of your screen and work and graft all day, and actually that's not healthy. My wife is working from home. We're both working from home together. I'm in my routine. I've been working from home for 7 or 8 years now, so I'm used to it, and I have a routine. So at lunchtime I watch Bargain Hunt. I'll be honest with you, I watch trash TV, I watch some Bargain Hunt, and I walk the dog, and I get a good hour doing those two things, a good hour, maybe a little bit more some days when I'm feeling particularly needing of the walk. And I have a much more effective afternoon because of that. Trying to get my wife to leave her screen for 10 minutes is almost impossible. And I've been nagging her and telling her she should do that, because she's going to burn out. And so getting into those routines, getting into those habits is really, really important. I will win the battle eventually. I'll just keep nagging away. I will get there. So yeah, those things, routine and making sure you do take regular breaks is really important. Other things that companies can do is we've talked a lot about it in the past, in the last few questions, really about mental health and well-being being cultural. I think that's really important, and part of that is having mental health first aiders and champions in the business. Part of that is making sure there's a platform for people to talk, whether that's a one-to-one or whether that's just as well as perhaps the availability of a mental health first aider to go to, and making sure that's publicised. And making use of the EAPs if they're in place within the organisation, to make sure that the staff know that that's available to them, and that counselling is normally a part of that, and they can get access to that if they need to. And all that support that companies can offer, and all that communication that companies can offer, is very, very important as far as I'm concerned. And those are the main things, really. The self-care, we talked about that as well, didn't we? The self-care, making sure you find what your coping strategies work for you, and making sure you make use of them as well.
Absolutely, and I think to both your points in terms of almost a lot of meetings being online and the amount of screen time, people now not necessarily commuting and having, I know people, sometimes myself, in terms of using that commute time to kind of do additional hours because actually it's there and available to you, which in some ways is great, but absolutely I think that check-in of how much it can tire you out and impact your thinking time and productivity. I think the amount of time we spend connecting with people with a square box around their face, which is not necessarily what we're used to.
Yeah, it's a good point about the dreaded Zoom call. They've become the way of having meetings, and it's great. At least we've had that. At least you can see people's faces. You can engage with people better than you could on a phone. So it's better than a phone call would be, but it's still very impersonal. And the habit can be backing your diary up, back-to-back Zoom calls all day, and it gets very frazzling, and you are just looking at a screen all day. It's not healthy. So I've got my wife, just one thing I have been successful at doing is making sure there are breaks between each call, a 15 to 20 minute or half an hour break between each call, and she's not back-to-back on her diary. So she's put placeholders in her diary now after each call. To catch up, engage with herself, making sure that she's actioned what she needed to action from the previous call, and she's not backing up the work, because what was happening was she was doing the work from those calls after hours. So she was actually extending her hours from what she was working before. So it's really important to not do that.
Absolutely. And the other thing I wanted to add to that is something that I've started doing with my colleagues at work is actually asking, do we need to do a video call? Is it okay if I just call you? Because I say the word traditional, it's not really traditional. We've always called each other, but somehow Zooms have replaced that. So I think just the etiquette and saying to, and sometimes it's difficult to do with your clients, but internally just ask, can I just call you? Can I just pick up the phone and call you and have a conversation? Because I think the other thing we need to realize is, in terms of our senses beforehand, we had to listen very carefully. We weren't necessarily seeing each other's faces, or we would be in the office and we're talking and we can judge body language. But sometimes, especially if you're quite a creative person, sometimes you like to walk and pace as you're talking. So sometimes it's quite nice to just pick up the phone and say, hey, I just wanted to brainstorm. I'm walking, as you would normally do. So I think it's just trying to evolve a little bit more and choosing your mediums quite carefully. I know during COVID as well, one thing that we did at Cheerful is we actually had these, what we call cheerful bubbles, where depending on where you live, if you live in a certain borough, we would just meet up in a park, because we were allowed to do that at that point in time, and we would just sit down and just have a chit chat. And I think little things like that, it just makes you feel more connected, it makes you feel more included, it just makes it feel just human again, just those pieces that we just need to make sure that we're constantly doing, rather than just always doing a Zoom call, or, you know, can you instant message, or, you know, maybe if you're working from home, can you and a colleague just meet up for a coffee, you know, just doing different things to get you out, get you moving, getting your well-being up.
Absolutely. Thank you both for your insights and reflections on that. I'm going to ask a couple of questions that have come in from the audience that are watching today. So I'm going to start with the first question, which is, when working in a large company, what tips would you share in involving other departments to engage in creating a mental health strategy? So I'm going to come to Gavin first, if that's okay, and present that question to you.
I'm going to use a bit of a case study here to answer that question. Rather than doing theory, I'm going to give you a real example. So I went to a presentation by St John's Ambulance about mental health, and they had a guest speaker from Marks and Spencer's. So what Marks and Spencer's, a lady who was not a senior person within an organisation, but she had interest in mental health. She went to the board and said, look, we need to do something about mental health here. There's issues in the business. We need to make it cultural. Can I be given a small budget and some time to do that? So they gave her literally a tiny budget, and they gave her literally a tiny amount of time, but they gave her something to go and do something about it. And what she did was she went out and she bought an inflatable elephant. And she put it in the staff canteen and put a sign above it saying, anybody who's got any issues about mental health and well-being, here's some post-it pads, put it on a post-it pad and stick it on the inflatable elephant. So it was the elephant in the room. And I thought that was so simple, so easy to put in place, and empowering to the teams to allow them to share their issues and concerns and get that conversation going. So what happened as a result of that, she gathered the feedback, she went back to the board and said, look, you know, here's the feedback, can I have more money, can I have a bit more time? They gave her a bit more money, gave them a bit more time, and now it's become a huge thing. This elephant has become a big thing. So they've got little stress elephants now that they use rather than the inflatable elephant, but it's still the elephant in the room. And they're now rolling that out to the stores. It was initially just at head office. That has become cultural within their head office, and it's now going to become cultural within their stores because of a simple start. With a very small budget and a very small amount of time, it starts somewhere. It has to start somewhere, and that's where they started it. And I hope that's answered the question, but I think it's good to give a real example of how a company as big as Marks and Spencer's has managed to get that to become a conversation piece within their business and have some solutions put in place accordingly. Hope that was helpful. I hope I've answered it all right. Vicky, was that? You want to do more? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, love a case study. So thank you very much for sharing that. That's brilliant. I'm going to give a question to Nat, if that's okay, which is around, I guess, the suggestions on how to get managers to take kind of mental health seriously and supporting their teams, specifically within, I guess, the event sector. Have you got any experience or any advice in terms of how to kind of engage supporting teams at this time?
Oh, that's a very tricky question to answer, actually. Just from my own personal experience, I think at Cheerful Wall, I mean, everyone's going through exactly the same thing. So I think there's definitely a lot more understanding from management because they're actually going through the same processes that all of us are going through. And I think also on a management level, there's a lot more stress in terms of the actual overall business and where the events industry is going at the moment. So I think we're all in a place of understanding. And I think we're definitely becoming a lot more considerate to others and their feelings. And at Cheerful, this has actually come down from the management in terms of us needing to really think about our own individual mental health and well-being. I know that doesn't really answer the question, but essentially from my experience, I think everyone's in the same boat, and I think they're just taking mental health and well-being a lot more seriously than they might have done before, especially when it comes to the events. And I think the event sector is going through quite a rapid change in terms of what we are and what we aren't allowed to do, and we don't know when we will be able to do a live event. So there's a lot going on at the moment, and I think every organisation is thinking about that, and I know there's a lot of campaigns out there. So I think I would be a little amiss if there was a manager that wasn't really thinking about mental health and well-being. I mean, it's literally everywhere you go. It's on every single platform you look at. It's on the TV. It's everywhere. Sorry, that's the best answer I've got for you there.
No, absolutely. I think you're completely right in terms of what you said. I think we are seeing great steps forward in terms of seeing the mental health agenda everywhere, and people feeling like, and hopefully seeing the importance of it in terms of if you are a manager or if you are a leader, the importance of getting the best out of your people and getting the best out of your teams in terms of the way you work. And I think it's really important, I guess, just to add to that in terms of building how mental health, I guess, presents itself when you are a manager and when you are managing a team, to make sure it's just built in through training and kind of leadership development, and making sure it's always part of the work that your managers are doing, that it's not seen as a separate topic for you as a manager. It's not you are a manager and then you look at mental health. Actually, mental health is a massive part of you being a manager and you leading people, I think, with that. Gavin, did you have anything to add to that at all?
I did, but I can't remember what I was going to say. I think there is still some companies where the senior management are close to it. There's still a percentage, and that percentage might be declining. I think it is declining, absolutely, but we need to get it to zero. So there is still a battle to be fought with some companies with very traditional values who see it as a cost, see it as a weakness, don't see the strength of people who are struggling with mental health, who are valuable to the business, and I think that that does need to change. So that was the point I was going to make. So I have remembered what I was going to say, and I think it is important that we fight that battle. Because we've got to get these people to see the reality of the situation, that it is important on a personal basis, on an individual basis, but on a cultural basis, and lastly on a business success basis, because Deloitte have proven that is an investment, and so that needs to be shouted from every rooftop so that people in all businesses can understand that.
Absolutely. Thank you both for your insight on that question. I think we've got the time for just one final question, which is somebody said, I think this is referencing some of the survey results from the Royal Society of Public Health in terms of 1 in 5 reporting severe mental health challenges within the industry. So I guess just a little bit in terms of what are the underlying issues in the hospitality and events sector which kind of undermine the mental fitness of those working in the sector, and what can the industry, I guess, what are the top 3 things we think the industry should be doing in terms of supporting mental health with that? So I'm going to open that up. If I come back to Gavin first, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, what the issues are, I mean, again, I'm not trying to skirt the question, but it is a very individual thing. Different people are affected in different ways, but there obviously a high instance of self-employed people within the industry, event directors, event managers, and I think the stresses and strains of that it makes a high instance. In fact, Eventwell did a survey, it must be 2 years ago now, and it was 1 in 3 in that sector of the industry, so it's even more extreme there. A lot of pressures on deadlines, client issues, venue issues, all those things, and they're kind of stuck in the middle between them, so that all those pressures are coming onto that those people, and I think that contributes to it as well. In terms of the current situation, clearly there's issues around the furlough and non-furlough, the success of the business, whether it's going to, if they're employed, whether that business is going to succeed and get through this, and the uncertainty that we've already talked about. Those are the things that I think are probably exercising most people and causing issues. How we get round it, I talked at the very start about communication, and whilst the government perhaps could improve the communication about things and give some clarity around things, also individual companies can do that as well and make people feel more secure about what's happening with it, for them personally, but also for the business. So that would be an important thing. And we've already talked about the return to work and making sure that we deal with the furlough, non-furlough issue, and give staff a reinduction back into the business and onboarding process back into the business. All those things will help. And again, we've already talked about the culture within the business. We've talked about the elephant in the room, those kind of things to make the mental health culture within the business. I haven't got anything additional to add to those things we've already brought up, really. It's just getting that done and getting it done better. And doing a personal best every day is something I like to say. World-class athletes don't start off as world-class athletes. They become world-class athletes by doing a personal best every day. So all of us can do that. We can start off wherever we start in our journey, but if every day we try and do it a bit better, we'll be world-class. And that's all I say to my delegates when I'm talking at training courses: just do a personal best every day. So there's my tip.
That's great, thank you. And I think, Nat, you mentioned earlier in terms of almost the control piece that you have when working in the events industry, and that probably being a big part of the impact of it currently, I think, is finding out what you can control in this current environment with so much uncertainty going on.
Absolutely. I think I would echo everything that Gavin just said, but I think the other important thing, as you just quite rightly highlighted, is, before COVID, we were very much in control of everything that we did. We could plan for a lot of things and foresee things that may happen when you're doing a particular project. At the moment, it's, we don't know when we will be able to do an actual live event, but even in the hybrid space, you're having to think about so many different eventualities. It's not just having, a COVID plan, but it's also having to think about, well, what's the new government advice today, because it changes consistently, and that's going to cause some stress. Having a COVID plan and making sure that everyone fully understands it and abides by it and leads by example is also quite important. I think just in terms of what's going on in the industry at the moment, there again, we said there's lots of people being furloughed, or there's people who are actually being made redundant quite consistently. So I wouldn't be surprised if those kind of concerns are weighing on people's shoulders, just in terms of, well, how long will I have a job for? What can I do if that job falls through? I think when we were actually preparing for this, and we were talking on Tuesday, Gavin actually mentioned that he has an organization that helps people with actually coping with that kind of situation where they may have lost their jobs and they're stuck and they actually don't know what to do. I think that's probably going to be something that's weighing a lot on people's minds. Those that are self-employed, it's, who do you lean on? Where is your community? I think what we need to do as organisations is we really need to take the word community seriously, and we need to take the word culture seriously, and we need to take, mental health and wellbeing very, very seriously. And I think we're all doing that, and we're all taking those steps, and then just making sure that we're all part of that bubble and that we all feel safe together. Because I think once we feel safe together, then it helps us make those steps to being better at work. But without that support, without that safety blanket behind you, it's very difficult.
Absolutely. And I think that is a really wonderful point to end on. I think in terms of us, we are all in it together, and supporting one another is really crucial. But I am really conscious of time, so I'm going to draw the session to a close. And firstly, I would like to say a massive thank you to Nat and Gavin for joining us today on the panel. It's been a really wonderfully interesting discussion, so thank you both so much for your time. I hope for those of you watching, it has inspired you to continue driving open conversations about mental health, certainly in the events and hospitality sector, as we work through the next 6 to 12 months. And if you are looking at any ways to support your people, we're pleased to share that we've got lots of kind of free resources on our website that should help. And obviously, if you're interested in kind of furthering confidence and skills with your people in terms of talking about mental health, we have lots of different training courses available, and you can find some more information on our website. So thank you for joining us today. I'm sorry if we didn't get around to answering your questions directly, but we will follow up afterwards. I'm wishing you a wonderful afternoon. Thank you very much.